You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern, your host, and I have Andy Marsh, CEO of Plug Power, on the program today. I'm really excited to have Andy on the program. Andy's the CEO of a publicly traded company that is a $12 billion valuation currently by the market, and it's a leader in the hydrogen space. And Andy, I'm glad to have you on the show.
Great to be here, and thanks for having me, Matt.
Well, tell us a little bit, Andy, about your journey to getting to Plug Power and what led you to that position.
Oh, wow. It's I started out at Bell Laboratories, and maybe your listeners who are over 50 years old remember what Bell Laboratories was. It was the premier R&D research arm of the Bell system. Renowned for figuring out how old the universe was, the lasers, the first transistors. And I was fortunate enough to work for Bell Laboratories for 18 years. And my primary focus was the development of power systems. And if you think about fuel cells, for example, power systems are quite a good field to get a start in to move you into fuel cell space. Then, Matt, I went and started a company with two buddies, and a company that powers most of broadband, about 30% of broadband in the U.S. for outdoor applications. The building I'm sitting in is probably powered by a Valier power piece of equipment. It's still the premier technology. It was a company I started with a couple of friends. We grew to $100 million in about a 6-year period. We sold it, and then I was looking for my next opportunity in life, and I rolled into Plug about 15 years ago, and that's how I'm here.
Well, that's a great story. So tell the listeners a little bit about what Plug Power does. My understanding is that you started, or one of the major focuses was power for forklifts and energy systems, instead of kind of the old batteries that forklifts used to run around with, which I understand would probably be similar to a car battery. Your Plug Power developed hydrogen cells to run those motors. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. I think the journey is even further than that, Matt. Plug is actually 25 years old. And as I mentioned, I've been here for 15 years. And when I joined, it was a pure research company. We had research and work going on in 4 different fuel cell technologies. We had, lots of government projects. And my responsibility was, and why I was hired, was to transform this company into a commercially viable business. And we ended up focusing on fuel cells, putting them into forklift trucks, and then that led us to other paths. But the advantages were, and I think this is really interesting, because when you talk about advantages for on-road vehicles for fuel cells, they're actually very similar. Why did Walmart today has over 10,000 of our units? Why did they choose this product? Because they could fuel them fast compared to a battery. They would run 1.5 times longer. They could eliminate all the complexity of the battery room. But as we were dealing with Walmart, what we found was that there really wasn't, in our story. When I read the SpaceX story, in some ways it's very, very comparable. What we found was there really wasn't folks who could build hydrogen fueling stations at scale. So we learned how to build hydrogen fueling stations. And as time has grown on, we've reached the point where, we're building hydrogen generation systems across the country. We're looking to have 70 tons available by the end of the year of green hydrogen produced by Plug. We became this really incredibly vertical integrated company. Today, we have over 60,000 fuel cells running around in places like Amazon and Walmart. Today, we've built over 180 fueling stations. Today, we have joint ventures for on-road vehicles for light commercial vehicles with Renault in France. We have a plan to build out 500 tons of green hydrogen here in the United States by 2025. We have a JV with SK in South Korea, the third largest Korean conglomerate that build large-scale stationary products. So the company has gone quite a long distance. And, talking about the fuel cells and forklift truck business, which isn't the sexiest business of the world, but during COVID in March of 2020, about 25% of food in the U.S. touched one of our products. So, that really is the Plug story and how we got to where we are.
Well, I think that starting small and finding a niche that is a viable niche and then expanding and growing is a good business model. And I would say, I was exposed to hydrogen fuel cell technology back because my dad, his degree was in chemistry, and so he was a chemist, and so he had all these chemistry journals, and he talked about fuel cells back 40 years ago as being kind of the wave of the future. And I was kind of just waiting for this to ever, play out into real time. And then I got my first fuel cell car about 4 years ago, the Toyota Mirai, and then I got my second one about a year ago. So I'm a believer in the technology. Just a little warning there for the listeners, but.
So, Matt, we have something in common. My dad worked on fuel cells too for General Electric and NASA. And so I was exposed to fuel cells at a very young age. I wasn't really paying that much attention to what my dad was doing, but I knew he worked on it. And via osmosis, I learned a lot about the technology.
Yeah, well, it's like we've been talking, it's been around for a long time, but I think one of the great things about adapting it to real life purposes is you start to see, okay, here are the little pieces that you have to create in order to build out the infrastructure to make it work on a grander scale. And it's great to see what your company is doing on that front. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, your company has gotten into the electrolyzer business. Does Plug Power actually manufacture those electrolyzers, and how does it, what's the future of that look like?
Yeah, so the future of electrolyzers is really bright, Matt. We have the largest factory in the world to make electrolyzer MEAs, which is in Rochester, New York. We bought two companies which really helped propel us into that business. One was a company which was an R&D company called Giner ELX in Concord, Massachusetts. And we purchased them because they were known to have the best stack technology in the world. We then went and purchased a company in the Netherlands, which really had expertise in system development. And we really have combined those two capabilities together. Now, when you look at our sales funnel, which is everything we're talking to people around the world, it's over $24 billion today for electrolyzers. Now, Matt, not all that comes through the funnel. Usually when you talk about funnel, about 10, 15% eventually filter through. But when you look at what's going on in Europe, there's a big push for electrolyzers. We're building a plant with a company called H2 Energy in Denmark. Denmark's looking to have 30 gigawatts of wind power by 2030. And they feel the best way to move energy is via hydrogen versus electricity. And a lot has to do with, how, the losses and the cost of pipes for building hydrogen out versus building electrical grid down into Germany. But, when you go through Europe, across the Northern Code, in the Baltics and in the North Sea, there's this huge demand for wind power and you're leveraging that wind to create electricity. And then when you take a look at Northern Africa and thinking about solar, there's a big push in Europe, in places like Tunisia, to build solar farms coupled with hydrogen electrolyzers generating hydrogen, to put that in pipelines from Northern Africa into Southern Italy, using pipelines that exist today. So, it's the electrolyzer business is, especially in Europe, a great deal of focus has been gone into the fact that it's a replacement for natural gas. It helps clean their carbon footprint up. And certainly what's going on in Ukraine has really accelerated that. And here in the US, and I know we'll probably get into it a bit, the production tax credit, which is part of the Inflation Reduction Act, we're already seeing can be a huge accelerator for the generation of green hydrogen, because that act provides, makes green hydrogen, more competitive than natural gas today.
That is pretty amazing. Well, you're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern, and I've got Andy Marsh, CEO of Plug Power, on the program today. Got so much to talk about with Andy. He's really at the cutting edge of clean energy technology, and we'll be right back in just 1 minute. You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern, and I've got Andy Marsh, CEO of Plug Power, on the program today. Andy, you were just talking about the electrolyzers that your company is building out and the need for those going forward. Just for the audience's sake, my understanding is one of the big problems that we have with wind and solar is that a lot of times we have wind and solar power being generated, but nowhere to really send it to. And that if we have the ability to use these electrolyzers to take that energy, turn it into green hydrogen, then we can use that green hydrogen at a later point, which would basically be a good energy storage mechanism. And my understanding is we're building a huge storage facility in Utah that I believe is government funded, and that could store a lot of hydrogen there for all the wind and solar that's being generated in the West. You were talking about Denmark, and I was just in Copenhagen this summer, and they were talking about how during the winter they are generating over 100% of their energy through offshore wind. So I guess that's going to go up higher, and therefore they're going to need this energy storage capacity to, and that's where your green hydrogen will come in, right?
Yeah, Matt, couple points. The first one is in Denmark, what they actually are thinking about is how to become a net exporter of energy into Europe. And so you're absolutely right. They probably have sufficient wind power to meet their needs today, but they're actually thinking about building more and more wind, because it's one of their differential advantages of, that they see that they can be generating energy, creating hydrogen, and to be supplying that energy to Central Europe and be a replacement for Russian natural gas. Here in the States, I really found your comments here really interesting, because if you take a look where you are in California, some of the best work that's been done has been done at UC Irvine by Dr. Jack Brouwer. And some of that work talks about, how you manage wind and solar on the California grid when the California grid becomes 100% renewable. And, storing hydrogen in caverns is not new. Natural gas is stored in caverns today also, but you could change those caverns in California to be storing hydrogen. And as you mentioned, using electrolyzers to create green hydrogen when the sun's shining a lot and the wind's blowing a lot, and storing that for a rainy day. And when that rainy day occurs, one can think about hydrogen fuel cell plants replacing today's present peaker plants. and be able to generate high electricity right onto the grid to support California during the long seasonal times where the wind and solar's, the uptime's not sufficient for their needs. You're seeing the same sort of work going on around the world. With SK by 2024, 2025, we'll actually have 400 megawatts of power plants to support the South Korean, not North Korean. That would get me in trouble. The South Korean grid.
So yeah, I had Professor Jack Brower on the program a while back. Great guy, and hydrogen guru.
Yeah.
We
We have about 4 projects going on with Jack because a great research facility and great leader in this industry.
Right. I've also had Mayor Rex Paris, who's a big hydrogen believer, mayor of Lancaster, California, who has invested a lot in hydrogen technology. I don't know if your firm has worked at all with Mayor Paris.
I haven't, but we are building a green hydrogen. It's under environmental permitting now in Mendota, California, to generate 30 tons. And I think we're looking to grow it to 45 tons per day of green hydrogen. For your listeners, that's probably equivalent to like 90,000 gallons of gasoline per day. But that actually will be using solar power, where we'll be using our electrolyzers to create green hydrogen. What's really interesting, we're actually going to be using wastewater and cleaning it up in the community to be used in the electrolyzers, then circulate it back. So, part of that water will be able to, provide the needs for water for the local community. So, it's that pure circular loop we're looking at. And as you know, Matt, your state is really one of the leaders, if not the leader in the world, in hydrogen fuel cells. And it's one of the reasons we're building a hydrogen plant in California.
So where are we in terms of this goal? The Biden administration had created this Earthshot goal of making 1 kilogram of hydrogen $1. And I think it's now around $7-8 to make a kilogram of hydrogen. Where are we in that curve of getting us closer to $1?
So I would say that you can generate hydrogen at a much lower cost than $7-8 today. When you look at the hydrogen that's used in oil refinery for desulfurization, that hydrogen is probably about $1.50 today. Now, it's probably not to the quality you need and certainly doesn't have the CO2 footprint you need. But if you think about electrolyzer technologies, and a lot, Matt, has to do with kind of how you count that. If you think about putting hydrogen in a pipeline, say at 40 bar or so, if you're getting electricity at 2 cents a kilowatt hour, you can get pretty close to that Earthshot numbers even today. But what's a real plant? And that's one of the things that I think about a lot is that you have to think about, everybody will throw numbers like that around, but you have to think about what it really takes. And if you think about delivered hydrogen today, we can deliver liquid hydrogen to customers that cost in the $4 to $5 range a kilogram today, which when you compare that to the cost, for example, of diesel, it's very, very competitive with diesel today. And the investment tax credits just make it much more competitive. I would tell you, Matt, you're paying too much at the tank in California because there's not enough hydrogen players in the world today. but that's about to dramatically change because the level of competition for hydrogen is about to be much different. Because in reality today, there's only about 2 players that support hydrogen generation. And I think if you look 5 years from now, there'll be 10 people, and competition will drive down cost.
Well, that's great to hear. Some say hydrogen can never compete with electric battery technologies. What do you say to this? And Elon Musk's comment of the fuel cell. Is that just trash talk from a competitor?
I would say this. I am not a purist. I think anyone who thinks that there's one solution to our energy crisis and to our climate crisis is fooling people. I mean, there's a great report about the 5 scenarios that get us to net zero by 2050 that was done at Princeton. And when you read those studies, batteries don't solve it all. So there are areas where hydrogen, for example, there were batteries aren't really helpful at all. And it comes to things like you need hydrogen for fertilizer manufacturing, for high heat to make green steel, for green concrete. Batteries solve none of those problems. Batteries don't really work for heavy duty vehicles. You get to a point, and this is real life work done by DHL, for like their panel trucks. And when they show that anything that goes over 100 kilometers, that fuel cells have a distinct advantage because of their lighter weight. And 150 kilometers, batteries are just too heavy, and they fill their whole cargo up with batteries and not packages, which is their business. And so I think when you talk to customers like Amazon, Walmart, DHL, batteries are really not meant for light commercial and heavy, especially heavy duty vehicles that have to go any range.
Well, that's a fascinating topic as to how and when we're going to roll out hydrogen technology for trucks and heavy vehicles. You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern, your host, and we'll be right back with Andy Marsh, CEO of Plug Power. Stay tuned. You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern, and I've got Andy Marsh, CEO of Plug Power, on the program. Andy, is the U.S. government making the playing field level so that hydrogen has a chance to compete against, say, electric battery-powered vehicles? Because from what I see, the government is kind of putting the finger on the scale in favor of electric, and has been for the last few years, just starting to kind of give some help to hydrogen. Doesn't look like it's quite as much. How do you compete when the government is giving a little bit more to electric technology versus hydrogen?
Well, Matt, I actually think you're wrong there.
Oh, okay.
Hydrogen actually was one of the real big winners in the Inflation Reduction Act. There are 3 aspects of that act which is really beneficial to hydrogen and fuel cells. One is this production tax credit of $3 a kilogram for green hydrogen. It actually makes green hydrogen, and this is work that was based on work by Bernstein, probably the lowest cost gaseous liquid energy carrier in the world. It also has positioned the U.S. from a technology point of view to drive customers like companies like Plug that really invest in the development of electrolyzers and build hydrogen plants. And we're even given a great deal of thought how you can export globally hydrogen generated in the United States. So it really, that credit should not be understated. There's also we talked a little about storage. There's actually some great enhancements to storage credits, which are part of the bill. And third, the fuel cell investment tax credit for 10 years, which provides users a 30% tax credit for fuel cells, is really beneficial. And top that off with the extension for solar and wind, which makes the electrical cost for solar and wind, provide a steady footprint. I mean, I've seen numbers out there at 1.5 cents kilowatt hour for solar post this bill. That helps generate really low cost green hydrogen. I personally think the work done by people like Senator Schumer, Senator Manchin, the White House, in the Inflation Reduction Act has really give hydrogen a real push. And then when you look at the infrastructure bill, Matt, there was $8 billion for building hydrogen hubs and another $1 billion associated with electrolyzer R&D. So, you couldn't find, I'm also the chairman of the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Energy Association, and we're actually thrilled by what the government did to really help accelerate this industry.
I guess I'm thinking more retrospectively than this last 6 months. Definitely things have kicked into gear for hydrogen. But I'd ask you to tell the audience a little bit more about hydrogen hubs and why these are important and what do they mean?
Yeah, I think there will be in the United States probably a build out of 4 to 6 large hydrogen hubs. Which will be a place that where hydrogen will be generated. There'll be a place where hydrogen will be distributed, which will make it easier for fuel cells to be leveraged. There'll be 4 of these hubs in the United States, which will become kind of the building blocks for building out the hydrogen economy. If I was a betting man, I would think there's going to be one in California, probably one in Texas, probably one in West Virginia, and probably one in the Northeast. And I think all those will be hubs which will be demonstrating a multitude of ways to generate hydrogen, both green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, as well as being the baseline for really accelerating the deployments of fuel cell vehicles and usage of hydrogen for a variety of applications.
So in terms of renewables and generation of wind and solar energy, am I kind of going a little bit too far and thinking at some point in time in the not so distant future, we're going to be generating so much renewable power that we can make green hydrogen at scale to power all the vehicles that we need in our economy? Is that day, how far out is that day?
Well, I think that day's sooner than you think, Matt. I think there's work going on by Plug to generate green hydrogen nationwide. There's people like Nextera. There's all sorts of folks working and looking to build out. You mentioned the large project with Mitsubishi with storage and using electrical generation with present day gas turbines with hydrogen. So that day is probably much sooner than you think. And, I don't worry too much about the capabilities of how you go build out facilities to build electrolyzers. I think probably the biggest challenge is how fast the solar and wind rollout is in the United States. And, I think that when you look at the numbers, it doesn't really scare you. I think the biggest year for solar and wind was 2020 or 2019. And I think you look back at those numbers and how much more we have to start producing each year. It's not a number that, as an engineer, I'm not floored by the increase that's required for us to do that. So it's going to be a journey between now and 2030, which will accelerate rapidly. and then even faster between 2030 to 2050 to get to net zero, to where we're at a point where, people like Bloomberg and McKinsey talk about 20% of world energy coming from hydrogen, whether it's 15% or 25%. I think the build out will be pretty rapid as we go towards these net zero goals. And look, you see what's going on in Florida today, the horrific storm. There's obviously you can't say that was climate change, but it certainly has had an impact, making the ocean warmer and making these storms more dangerous.
Yeah, it's certainly a scary situation, and we need to do something, and we need to do something fast because we only have one planet, and if we screw it up, there's no going back. As far as hydrogen-powered airplanes, ships, trucks, is that a business area that Plug is investigating, or are you going to leave that to others to?
We've actually not only we have a lot of interesting work going on in planes. We've invested in a company called Universal Hydrogen. We have a couple other investments in companies, and we're developing products for those applications. And I can tell you, I'm an engineer, Matt, so they're really my forward-looking work activity. And I was with my team earlier in the day talking about how we can reduce the weight of fuel cells by up to 75%. And that would be beneficial, obviously, for aircraft, but lighter weight, higher efficiency, longer range is good for every applications ultimately. Mm-hmm. So we're investing a lot of times in planes. We, as I think we talked about, we have our JV with Renault for vehicles. Shipping, I haven't done a lot in. I saw that a train that we have some products running in actually ran for the first time yesterday. So that's a news scoop there, Matt. And all those applications where lightweight, durability, long range, we were involved, and fuel cells are really interesting. I haven't dug deep into ships yet, but I think ships are really probably green ammonia is probably the right solutions for long distance shipping. Ferries probably are fuel cells, but green ammonia made with hydrogen and nitrogen, green hydrogen and nitrogen, I think is a real interesting market. And I think that green ammonia running ships, especially for long haul, is probably the answer when you see the work going on. We're also involved with Airbus looking to position the first hydrogen hub for hydrogen generation for planes for Airbus. So that's work we have going on.
Well, that's exciting. So will they need to re-engineer the entire plane to make that work, or is that something that can be done with an existing plane that's a kind of a gas using plane?
Yeah. So Universal Hydrogen, which is doing really interesting work, is developing a retrofit kit to essentially for regional aircraft, which essentially allows you to roll and change out the roll-in liquid hydrogen and to make certain changes. When you would normally retrofit an airplane and retrofit it up to hydrogen. So it is a change out, but it is pretty straightforward.
Well, that's an amazing potential, because obviously, building the entire worldwide aircraft fleet from scratch would take a tremendous amount of time. So if we can retrofit those planes without having to kind of, go back to square one, that would be incredible. Yeah. You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern, your host. And I've got Andy Marsh on the program, CEO of Plug Power, and we'll be back in just 1 minute to talk to Andy about a number of other topics. You're listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern, your host, and I've got Andy Marsh on the program, CEO of Plug Power. Andy, I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about the missions and goals of Plug Power, say for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Where do you see the company going? I mean, obviously, some of it's kind of unknowable because the technology is changing. You're acquiring different companies, but kind of just general directional trends. Where do you see the company going?
So, Matt, we've been really clear that by 2025, we're going to be able to achieve $3 billion in revenue, and that'll be profitable revenue. But how we get there really has a lot to do with some of the basic work we're doing today. One is that, as we talked about, we're building out this green hydrogen network across the United States. We're beginning to build our own hydrogen generation plants in Europe, for example, at the Port of Antwerp. Having low-cost green hydrogen available will be a great accelerator for our fuel cell market. And we have some exciting products going on there. One is the continual refinement and improvements in our material handling business, where we envision 25% of forklift trucks by 2030 could ultimately be ran on fuel cells. We think a great deal about stationary products. We've done with Microsoft, we've done some leading edge work developing fuel cell products that could be integrated with data centers. And every major data center company in the world has been engaged with us on this product development activity, as well as
Can I stop you right there for a second on the data center front? Because we know that data centers consume an enormous amount of power, and I assume it's just going up exponentially as every year. Tell us a little bit about why this is a good product for data centers.
Well, first, Matt, is that let's talk about Microsoft, who's been the most public about it. And Microsoft today uses about 30 megawatts of diesel generators at their site. And you can, because you have to make sure they work, they run probably only an hour a day normally, but as you have long blackouts in California, they have to back up these 30 megawatt data centers. And when you think about their goals to be clean, that fuel cells and hydrogen are really the only solution for them to meet their net zero goals. It also, when we look over time, over the next 5 years, you can see that technology can be cost competitive with diesel technology. On top of that, Matt, we talked a little bit about how you support the grid. They can use them as peaker plants so that when the electricity coming is high, they can use their own internal generated hydrogen fuel cells to power the data centers and not have to pay peak charges. Top of that, they can actually use it and leverage it to put electricity back on the grid. That's why people like Microsoft were so excited. And for your listeners, if you Google Plug Power Microsoft, you'll see some really incredible descriptions of what Microsoft and Plug Power are looking to do together. So that's a real growth opportunity.
So would these data centers then become like little power plants that could contribute to the grid during peak hours and contribute more green energy to the grid?
Absolutely. Think about them as microcells. It is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about microgrids on the program a number of times with lots of different guests and different pieces of this economy, and it seems as though it is the future to have many different nodes of power versus one major utility provider.
Yeah. And, next year, we're in position, I met this week with the team, to have 60 megawatts of that deployed next year. Doesn't sound like a big number, but it's a big start from zero. And it's been some of the more interesting work we've done. And we talked about the electrolyzer business, Matt. Um, the electrolyzer business is not a demand issue. It's actually a supply issue. We gotta, we could sell everything we got in the electrolyzer business because the demand for green hydrogen to replace other fuels and other chemicals, is, you can't really put a number around it. But think about ammonia manufacturing, which has become really critical during this terrible war in Ukraine. And we're already working with the green ammonia manufacturers to generate green ammonia and get rid of the usage of natural gas. It's
So
probably,
let me ask you, drill down on that a bit
yeah.
more. Should the market be responding to that and investing tens of billions of dollars in additional funds in that technology so we build out more electrolyzers, or is that government's role, or where should we be on that front?
So, Matt, I think it is. I think the U.S. government's actually done the work, and it's up to companies like Plug to develop our products and sell our wares. And there is customer pull. I have, the U.S. I have no no complaints about the government support. I think in Europe there's a great commitment, and there is certainly a lot of activity going on in Europe in both green ammonia, injecting of hydrogen into natural gas pipelines. And, in the US, it's kind of easier because it's less dependent upon government programs. It's much more market based. But, I think a lot of it resides with people who, like me, and all the people that work for me about how to make this happen.
Well, I'm going to ask you in terms of technology, hydrogen technology in cars. Toyota has invested heavily in it, and they're doing it. You'd say Renault is involved in it. Where are they in that process?
Yeah. So we have a JV. We're actually focused on, and I'm a believer that, sorry, Matt, I know you own two cars here. I think cars are probably more like a 2035, just because of the availability of things like fueling stations. I know California's done a good job, but the value proposition is strongest for commercial vehicles, where the advantages of fast charging, the advantages of longer range, the advantages of weight, are just so overwhelming that the value proposition is so far superior to batteries. It kind of comes down to the fact that you can keep the vehicle on the road all the time if you're using fuel cells without having to worry about charging. You can put more goods on board with fuel cells than you can with batteries because they're lighter weight and they can go twice as long as batteries. And the value proposition, if you're running a commercial enterprise, that's where you're going to see fuel cells dominate. Eventually, I think when you get to around 2035, there's a lot of people who, in California, I think only about 15% of people, I've seen data, could actually charge cars at their home. They live it. And I think that's a real limit. And I think that some of these advantages of fuel cells where, fueling looks a lot more like what you do at gasoline stations today, has a lot of advantages.
Well, in terms of trucks, and you're talking about, larger vehicles, where are we as far as getting that technology in trucks? Because obviously we have tens of millions of trucks on the road. We got to manufacture a lot of fuel cells to kind of make a dent in those emissions, right?
So a lot of good work going on, and there are a lot of companies working on heavy duty vehicles. Um, but I think that when you think about, and I think there's a lot more advantages of emissions. Um, you know, I can tell you when we look at it, there is a lot of customer pull at places like Walmart and Amazon to move everything from class 6 to 8 vehicles to fuel cells so that they can meet their net zero goals. I think you'll probably see more rollouts in the next 3-4 years. In Europe, we expect to have about 100,000 light commercial vehicles on the road for like Amazon Prime products that look like that to be delivering packages. So I think between now and 2030 in the commercial vehicle market, you're going to see a lot of activity.
Well, Andy, great having you on the program. Andy Marsh, CEO of Plug Power. You've been listening to A Climate Change. This is Matt Matern. And Andy, thank you again. Love to have you on the program to talk more about this exciting technology.
Thanks for having me, Matt. I enjoyed talking to you today.
Okay, well, it's been fantastic. Have a great day and tune back in next week.